So going to do a didactic today on the next steps in coordinated specialty care. So talking about transition and step down. And this presentation today is going to have a couple of purposes behind it. One, I'm going to talk about the rationale of why we're talking about step down in coordinated specialty care programming and why it's important. But also going to talk a little bit about the project that we have going on here in Ohio with regard to step down with CSC for FEP programming. So I will introduce myself. My name is Nick Dunlap. I am a consultant and trainer for the Coordinated Specialty Care for First Episode Psychosis program here at the Best Center. So when we're thinking about step down, is why focus on it? Why talk about it? And there's a couple of reasons to this, and I'll talk a little bit about why it's important long term. So taking a couple of things into account, but just to highlight why focus on it. So making step down a process. I know that a lot of times within CSC for FEP programming, a person is maybe stepping down or they're leaving the team for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in a second. But oftentimes it's not a process, it's more of an event in time. And so by making step down more of a process, there can be an improving of long-term outcomes for participants in CSC for FEP programming. And another reason is to maximize team resources. As I'm sure some of you are aware, there's a lot of responsibilities that FEP team members are responsible for, both within the team and within their larger agency as a whole. And so a lot of times when we're able to identify participants that are appropriate to step down care, it can allow team members to provide care to others that are maybe newer in their journey of treatment. So again, maximizing those resources and what teams have available to them. So talk a little bit about, what prompts a departure. And so you'll see terminology in here in various points. The bigger picture of this project here in Ohio, we're referring to as step down. But you'll see things like transition, discharge, departure, things along those lines. And I'll talk about how some of those terms can be interchangeable depending on the situation and depending on maybe where the team is located and agency capacity, for example. So we'll talk about that as well. So oftentimes, for some CSC for FEP programs, they are a time-limited service. So meaning that for some teams, a participant could be enrolled for 2 years, let's say, and at the end of that 2-year time period, they are then moving to some other type of service or some other type of program. So the idea is that 2 years is set in stone, and that is the time that a participant would be involved. Clinical stability. So a participant's doing really, really well. They are perhaps doing well with symptom management, doing well with stress management areas, doing well with medication. So they're pretty stable. And so they may be transitioned off of the FEP program. Participant request. So someone might be moving. Or they might just request, I don't want to be part of the program anymore, or maybe they don't want to be involved in mental health services, period. And so the participant may just request to discontinue. Something that comes up quite frequently, a lack of engagement. So a participant, for whatever reason, just kind of falls off the radar, to use that terminology. The team's having a difficult time contacting them. So they are kind of disenrolled from the program because of that. And then a determination of ineligibility. So maybe there's some diagnostic clarity that comes about from a participant being enrolled, or in some circumstances where maybe a participant needs a higher level of care than what a CSC for FEP program is able to provide to them. So when we talk about the project that we are doing here in Ohio with regard to Stepdown, I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail of how, who makes up this project, who's involved in this project. But we set out an objective to set up and develop a formalized process or procedure for participants to be able to step down from care from the CSC for FEP program. Now you'll see the term discharge in here. And transfer and discharge could be used interchangeably in this circumstance. So let's say, for instance, that it is someone, the participant is someone who is enrolled in the CSC for FEP program, but this is at a child and adolescent serving agency. So that participant, when appropriate to step down from care, they might have to, if they decide to continue with services in some capacity, they may have to be transferred to another agency. So they may get discharged from the agency as a whole. Whereas maybe other agencies are able to continue to work with the participant, but maybe they get transferred to another provider that's not part of the CSC for FEP program. So there's some variables to take into account when we talk about this step down process as well. So the goal is to utilize shared decision-making between the team, participant, and their family and natural support, and to improve clinical and functional status, and to utilize self-identified goals. So as we'll talk about this process here in a little bit, and what we've developed, or what we are developing here in Ohio, is to utilize goals that the participant themselves identify that they want to accomplish while they're involved in the CSC for FEP program. So the Ohio project here was a collaboration between Ohio MAS at the epicenter at the Ohio State University, and the Best Center at Neomed. And so there were a couple of things that occurred. Initially, when we got together to collaborate, we wanted to look at what existed already nationally within CSC for FEP programs with regard to step down. We looked at literature regarding, what, again, nationally, what is being utilized, what does that process look like? And one of the other things, because we valued the input of existing CSC for FEP teams in Ohio, we had meetings as a group with the majority of the CSC for FEP teams in Ohio to talk with them a little bit about what does step down look like for them. What do they do? We had several questions. Typically, this occurred during team meeting times, where we were able to gather information from all of the providers that were able to attend and talk about it. So as a result of some of those meetings, there were some themes that came about. While some teams did have a kind of a thoughtful process, a way that they were able to approach step down when participants were determined to be appropriate to step down from care, most did not have any type of formal process that occurred. Now, it wasn't that teams neglected to discuss when it was appropriate, but it wasn't anything that was formalized in any way. Most of the teams identified a desire to talk about transition much earlier with participants in the process of their treatment. So maybe within the first couple of months of enrollment into the CSC for FEP program would be something that they would be able to talk with the participants about. And then most teams reported some occurrences of having participants enrolled probably longer than was needed. And this could be due to a variety of reasons, but it was something that a lot of team members reported, a lot of our teams reported as being an area of concern or something that they recognized as being potentially a problem. So within the Ohio project, there's going to be a couple of phases that I'm going to review with you, and I will touch on this at the end as well. That much of this is in development. We are going through the process of really finalizing some of these phases and some of these steps and what they might look like. But there's a couple of things that we did identify for sure that we wanted to be a part of these various phases. So In the phase one, there's the discussion points at intake. So this is where participants are able to understand that the CSC program is time limited, recovery oriented services, and that services and referrals are available in the various roles that are involved in the CSC program as well. There's a recovery goals that are going to be part of the new data entry system here in Ohio. They're going to be called recovery goals. And participants would be able to identify what those recovery goals would be, ideally within the first month of their enrollment into the CSC for FEP program. And then there's going to be baseline psychometric scores as well. So these would be the measures that teams would be gathering already. They would be incorporated into this process as well. And then depending on what goals a participant identifies that they want to work on, referrals to the appropriate services would be made. So this could be if a participant wants to work, obviously a referral to the supported employment education specialist on the team would be made at that time. So as part of the next phase, there's going to be dedicated sessions every 6 months to review where participants might be with those recovery goals that they've identified. The psychometric scores will be monitored as well to see if there's been improvements in the scores with those measures. So ideally, those would occur within every 6 months. And then once the participants reach 75% of their recovery goals, and or the measures that they have completed as well support stability, then step-down care could kind of be initiated. And that's what this phase 3 is going to talk a little bit about. So it might involve tapering down sessions or meetings that participants might have with providers, and then continuing to work on and update any of the remaining recovery goals that the participant identified. And one of the things that we'll talk about in the future when with regard to this project is looking at, what is an expected timeline for when the participant would officially step down, and could some of the goals that they've identified be addressed in whatever that step down care might look like. And then looking at whatever any additional goals and making appropriate referrals, making sure to link to appropriate providers in terms of establishing that care. So utilizing this phase 3 to identify where would referrals need to occur, who would they need to be meeting with, and then developing a wellness plan. This is the terminology that we've, as a group, have identified. So looking at continuing areas where the participant might benefit, identifying high-risk situations, identifying who was supportive of their recovery journey, who would they want to continue to utilize as their support network. Then there's the last phase where there is discussion amongst the team, reviewing the recovery goals, reviewing the psychometric scores to make sure that it is determined that a participant is appropriate. And then the step down, transition, discharge, whatever is appropriate for that particular team at that particular agency would then occur. So we would transferring to whoever those providers might be it somebody on the team, somebody within the larger agency, or maybe somebody that would be at a different agency. And so one of the things that we found in looking at a lot of the literature was that when you look at long-term outcomes of participants that have been involved in CSC for FEP programming, the idea that stopping services or not having them continue in some way, shape, or form could impact those long-term outcomes. So it seemed to be of benefit for participants to have care even after they become disenrolled, if I could use that terminology, from the CSC for FEP program. Okay. So a couple of things to just highlight here in closing, that this process is still being finalized. We are still looking at how we can continue to limit burden's a strong word, but yeah, to limit the time for team members to be able to devote to this process as well. So we talked about as a group incorporating Hone because Hone is going to be something that the teams will be doing. All of the CSC for FEP teams in Ohio would be doing anyway. So it wouldn't be any extra steps necessarily in terms of entering some of that information in. And then the other thing that we felt was really important is that it focuses on the goals of the participants. So the participants are identifying specifically what they are wanting to work on and what they are wanting to accomplish during their time involved in treatment. And so it becomes a very participant-centered process in terms of determining when participants would be appropriate for step down. Okay, so I am, and for some of you that are team leaders,